Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar, The Empowered Learner, The Future History of Education, sponsored by Microsoft. Today's speaker is Cameron Evans, Chief Technology Officer of Microsoft Education. A 20-year veteran for education training, Cameron has been a pioneer and a leader of education transformation in public schools and universities across the nation. Cameron focuses his expertise productivity of people with technology. Before I pass things off, I'd like to mention two quick things. If at any time during the presentation you have questions, please post them in the Q&A panel on the lower right-hand side of your screen. You are also encouraged to join the conversation with Cameron on Twitter with questions and comments using the hashtag EDUEmpowered. Cameron's Twitter handle is @EDUCTO. Also, please be on the lookout for a follow-up email with a copy of the slides and a link to the archive to review and share with colleagues. Now, I'd like to pass things off to Cameron.
Outstanding. Thank you. It's a wonderful pleasure to be with all of you all today and get involved in this conversation that we need to have regarding education, where we're going, what we're going to do to make this a much better experience for our students and a much better experience for our teachers. When I look at this conversation, the future history of education, I want to say from the outset that our goal here is not to say this is the Microsoft way to do it versus the Apple way to do it versus the Google way to do it. This is some corporation telling education how to do education. That's not our goal at all. Is really to make sure that as we look at the next few years that we have across our school systems in the U.S., that we don't repeat history, because the opportunity is so great. We have a significant responsibility to really drive home how do we make learning far more effective, far more engaging for our students across the board. And so with that, let's get started. As we get into this conversation, I do want to share a little bit about me so that you know who you're talking to. I have a lot of fun, probably have the coolest job on earth. My career has been really, really fascinating at Microsoft. But one of my favorite movies is Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. And when you look at this movie, there are some wonderful scenes that retell a story of a young boy coming of age in the aftermath of 9/11. And there's a wonderful scene where the father is making business cards for his son, and he's got amateur this / amateur that / amateur other on all of his business cards. He has all of these job titles, and it just reminds me of how the careers for our students are going to be in the future with all of these various careers that they have. And even at Microsoft, my career is varied. First of all, I'm an artist. I focus on how did I create things that the world hasn't seen, that the world needs, and that the world can appreciate. And to do that, I spend a lot of time as a student. I do believe that lifelong learning was the one thing that my teachers from both K-12 education and higher education instilled in me on how to acquire information and insight and use it in meaningful ways to produce things. And beyond that, I'm a husband. I have an anniversary this month, as well as a father of a young girl, 11 years old, that teaches me more than she realizes and keeps me really connected to a grounding of where we're going as an educator. And I'm the second generation of educators in my family, as well as a veteran in the United States Air Force. And so these perspectives color how I look at life and how I look at learning. And I give you all of these perspectives because I want you to understand that it's not just some Microsoft lens that we look at things. We look at a much broader context across all of the myriad of roles that I have to play throughout the course of a day and throughout the course of a week. And with that, I want to open up a conversation on how we think about what are the issues that we need to solve in our schools today. What is the number one consideration that we need to have in fixing our schools? And I want to open up a whiteboard discussion for you to type in on the screen what you think the number one issue is. And this is an opportunity for us to be a lot more interactive and have some dialogue for you to participate. At the top of the screen, you should see a little text icon with a T that allows you to write. Some of you may have tablets that are participating in this webinar. If you think you can do it by hand, good luck with that. I've seen interesting results. But what I want to get from you all is what is the number one issue that you think we face in our U.S. schools, and really narrow down the conversation there. And I'll be looking for your results here. Mine is yellow, so you can change the color if you want to. This is the interesting part where you get to see the technology the way your students get to see it in classroom for online learning. Got a number of colleges on the call today. So there are no issues in school. Everybody's problems are solved. We have no one's produced any content for our slide here. Well, I'll share with you what we've heard from other schools while you all marinate on that particular question. What we've heard from other schools is that we have a lack of funding across education, that we don't have enough money in our schools to do the things that we need to do. I'm reminded of the Waiting for Superman movie where President Clinton said when it comes to education, it's a financial problem, and yet it's not a financial problem. There are some schools that have plenty of capital, both for operating budget as well as for capital budget, and still don't have the right results being produced for their students. And then sometimes it's a financial issue for parents at homes in the communities that our kids come from that create a conundrum. For others, it's teacher quality, time for professional development, time for reflection and growth. How do we improve the practice of our educators? And then we have issues around the amount of things that our schools are being asked to do. There's just basically too much stuff that's going on. But when we think about this particular question of what's the number one issue from a Microsoft perspective, we recognize that we can't solve every challenge that schools have, and there's not a myriad of things that we want to focus our energies on. There's only one thing that we want to focus our energy on. And so as we look at this space, the thing that we focus on is that we do not graduate enough students from our schools that are ready for the next opportunity. And that becomes the challenge that we have to deal with in our schools across the board, is how do we increase the capacity of our youngest citizens and to a greater degree our oldest citizens to take advantage of all of the opportunities that we see in America. As the expectations that we have for competitiveness continue to rise, we see this gap also continue to broaden for our students, and that gap is significant. In students that are ages 16 to 24, we have double-digit unemployment in the United States for our young people. And the thing that is really interesting about this is that we have double-digit unemployment for young people around the world. I live in Dallas-Fort Worth. I was recently in Houston speaking with the Greater Houston Partnership about STEM education, and one of the things that we highlight both in Dallas as well as in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Houston, Atlanta, and throughout the country is that most of our cities that have a lot of opportunity are importing their brain power, meaning that everyone that lives there, the vast majority of them that have college degrees from whether that be a bachelor's degree or higher, came from somewhere else in the country, not from that city. And with that being the case, it creates a high degree of issues that we have to think about on how do you build up capacity so that the people who live in a particular city can actually take advantage of the opportunities that that creates. And that brings us to the understanding of where does America fall in a global context around our ranking. So the World Economic Forum released a report just recently that shows that the United States ranks number 5 in the world in terms of national competitiveness. And this is an important particular slide, but it's not important for the reasons you think. I get the notion that oftentimes companies, corporations come in with all types of charts that show where America comes in from a global ranking standpoint. And then you have to ask the question, what does a global rank have to do with the kids in my classroom? What does a global rank have to do with the kids in my school or the kids in my school district or the ones wanting to attend my college? But when we look at this on a global scale, we have to look at this in terms of competitiveness, not OECD scores, or PISA scores, reading, mathematics, but in competitiveness. Because what the World Economic Forum found is that the U.S. had actually been slipping for the past 4 years, and we just climbed 2 points. We were ranked number 7 globally, and then we got back to number 5 just because of improvements in our economy and macroeconomic factors. But this ranking speaks to whether the opportunity gap that I just spoke about that our young people have will actually increase over time or whether they will decrease over time. And this is the gap that we have to start figuring out if the educational opportunities that we're providing our students are going to help us be more competitive as a nation. Since our students need to be more globally competitive, we need to look at what this looks at around the world. And so for Microsoft, we start thinking about how our vision translates closing that gap. And this is where it's just simply anywhere, anytime, any skill learning for everyone. As we think about learning today, the parts of this vision may already be realized based on where you are in the socioeconomic ladder. If you're in a more affluent community, you may have mobile broadband devices. You may have the ability to get online anywhere, anytime, and learn anything. There are many courses that are being taught from YouTube to MOOCs to Skillshares to people just providing content for you to learn anything. I've watched my own daughter learn how to build things in Minecraft all the way to making duct tape wallets, which was a huge fad last year, to bracelets made out of looms, out of rubber bands. All of this from her own ability to acquire the knowledge from YouTube, figure out what it is that she wants to build, and then build a presentation to get my wife to go out and buy all the supplies she needs to make whatever it is that she has a penchant to go and make. And then create and produce that knowledge back out. And so we're at a place where, based on your economic status, you may already be realizing anywhere, anytime, any skill learning. However, it doesn't happen for everyone. We have ninth graders today in parts of the country, both in our urban areas and in our rural areas and suburban areas, that have never had a computer available to them, and starting the school year asking, can we change your password when they don't understand what a username is a challenge. So we still have a gap that we need to close, and any skill learning towards competence, towards mastery, is going to be the opportunity that we have to think about. So here, 2014, I want you to really rest in this knowledge. Our second graders this year that will start the school this fall, entering the second grade, they just finished the first grade, will graduate in the year 2025. They will graduate in the middle of the third decade of the 21st century. For these kids, I would recommend we not talk about getting them 21st century skills. They were born in the 21st century. Every skill they have is a 21st century skill. They know no other century skill to compare it to. So what we need are global skills that allow them to have a global context, to be globally competitive, to be globally competent and savvy. And this is the opportunity that our educators have to shape and set for the nation. They still need to have a hunger and thirst for curiosity. They need to know that their curiosity can be expressed through creativity and that they need to make a contribution. There is this notion that we should have learning for learning's sake. I am totally with that and supportive of that. But one of the things that we have to also think about, there was an old song in the 1990s that the chorus for the song was, "Ain't nothing going on but the rent." And at the end of the day, if our students, our citizens cannot begin to contribute on a global scale to support their local economy, learning for learning's sake doesn't pay the bill. We have to make sure that they can compete, and that's the challenge that we have. And so earlier this year, February 4th to be exact, Microsoft and a number of other major corporations around the country answered the call to President Obama's Connect Ed initiative, and we call it the digital learning transition, where we have a number of things that were laid out in the Connect Ed initiative that we needed to address. First, how do you get devices in the hands of every student in America? And the president wanted to do that for 99% of our kids. We've got 50 million kids in our public schools in America, and there will be 50 million kids in our school as we get to the year 2019, 2020, based on our census data. With that, if the vast majority of our kids have a mobile digital device, can we do that in a way that the device itself is cheaper than a group of textbooks? We've been able to achieve that this year, and it's going to get better. Also, can we get tools in the hands of these kids that allow them to really have their creativity, their ability to understand true collaboration in a meaningful context? Not just can I author a document and see who's working with me at the same time online. Those are table stakes today in thinking about collaboration, but how do we take collaboration to high-performing teams that allow them to see what it takes in order for them to have the competencies and the interpersonal skills that they need to be successful, whether they work for themselves or whether they work in a corporation or whether they work in a nonprofit institution. And then also, how do we look at educator development and the practice of bringing technology and pedagogy together in such a way that they both reinforce each other the way they do in high-performing school systems around the world? These are the things that Microsoft focuses on and is delivering as a part of this digital learning transition. And transitions are important because this is also the place where we've been here before, and we have to start thinking what is going to be different this time than what it was in any previous generation. How do we make sure that we don't repeat history and buy a whole bunch of stuff just to give fodder for media, the New York Times or Washington Post, to say school districts bought millions and millions and millions of devices costing billions and billions of dollars. They got all of these services. Did they sacrifice privacy and data in order to get these services and devices? Did they go and buy a bunch of things and nothing materially happened? Is it just getting the wrong answer faster? Is it just the digital of what used to be on analog? How do we make it different than what we did previously? And so we need to take a look at what happened previously. So on the screen before, I have this developmental cycle so that we can look at how hype begins and how it moves through towards a point of maturity. And there are some devices that I'm sure you remember that have been a part of this hype cycle. It started years ago with Palm Pilots and Pocket PCs. If we could just get a Palm Pilot in the hand of every student, I guarantee you education is just going to take off. I had a Palm Pilot. I'm sure some of you all still have Palm Pilot accessories somewhere in a garage, somewhere in a closet, somewhere in a kitchen drawer that you have no Palm Pilot to connect to, but for nostalgia's sake, you're still hanging on to it just because, for giggles and grins, everything that goes around comes back around again. And then we said, let's just get iPods. Oh my goodness, if we can just do MP3s and have the first generation flipped classroom, kids can just listen to these lectures at home. We had all kinds of news of schools and colleges and universities buying everybody iPods, freshman class got it. And wow, nothing happened. But then we decided we'll get a bigger iPod. This time it's a tablet. And this tablet is going to just do everything under the sun. And now we're starting to see from the beginning of an idea, we now believe technology is going to be so transformative that we can do it like a textbook. We can just get one textbook for every child, and this one device for every child will be a one-size-fits-all approach, and that will work, and education will be transformed. We have found that that does not work either on so many dimensions. We'll let you know how that fares out as I go through this conversation. And then there's some that say, well, all we need is a web browser. Everything's online. I remember those days if Yahoo was down, everybody thought the internet was down. And while we've evolved beyond that, Everything is not on a web browser. Everything is not actually online on the web. And more importantly, because so many people can create content so freely today, it's actually more important that students know how to interrogate resources and critically think about what content they're consuming online and how they can use tools to produce. And so we've got this idea genesis to overpromised benefits to under-delivered impact, that now we're starting to see what are the scenarios that we want to prepare students for, what are the conditions, what are the competencies that students need to have, and what technologies at what cost can get us there. This is where we start seeing empowered learners actually come alive, and this digital transition allow us not to repeat history. Now, for most people across the country, especially people who work in large corporations like I do, they think this picture that I'm showing you right now is what our classrooms and schools look like today. A group of kids, all with books in their hands, lined up facing the front of the classroom, waiting on the teacher to give them some sage counsel on what they need to know. The classrooms are crowded, they're over too small for the kids that we have, but you and I know this is not how our classrooms look today. We do have much more modern things, but I will highlight for you there are a couple of things in this classroom that are still true. Our class sizes may still be too large. We still may have too many kids in the classroom, but that may be more of an opportunity than it is a constraint. And one thing that's subtle about this particular picture, most of you probably look at this picture and go, wow, there are no brown kids in that classroom. That classroom lacks a lot of diversity. The truth is, most of those kids in this classroom are immigrants, just like the classrooms we have today, except that our immigrants are not coming from Europe anymore, and vast majorities, they're coming from Asia and Latin America. And the linguistic diversity that comes with those students, their English language proficiency and their family's proficiency or choice to want to speak English as a primary language at home, creates a whole new set of issues as we think about the modern classroom. So there are some things from history that we should go back and look at before we just simply say, let's abandon the past as we go forward into the future. But our classrooms today look much more like this. They have centers for kids to get together, collaborate. We still have some schools with desks. There are some labs. There are places where work centers where students can actually work on a variety of different projects throughout the day. But I want to call your attention to something that you may not see in the classroom. It's in the back of the classroom, and it's where the problem is. It's those 5 computers that are in the classroom. Some of these classrooms, these pictures intentionally don't have all Microsoft computers in them. There are classrooms that have Mac PCs. There are classrooms that have Windows PCs. There's some that have old iMacs that look like candy and gumballs. All of these things created an opportunity for non-consumption. Because if I have a classroom of 25 kids, and I have 4 or 5 computers in the classroom, then I have 20 kids that are non-consumers of technology for their learning, for their enrichment, for expanding their curiosity on a regular, frequent basis. That's a challenge for us that we need to think about, because there's not a career in any industry, in any place on the planet, that's not going to have technology, not going to have data, not going to have this interpretation and use and ability to build skills for students. And so as we think about how do we take this digital transition, if the devices are now lower cost than textbooks, where we can actually get a device where those kids are, instead of this picture where we have to have kids move from where they are to where the technology is, whether it's in a lab, they got to leave classroom, go down the hall, there's non-use going on when they're not in the classroom. If we can get devices in the hands of all of our students, if we can connect all of those students through broadband on a regular basis and improve their practice, what should the classroom look like? And this is where we get to rethinking the actual space, the locus of learning. Whether that space is a virtual space online or a physical space in your school buildings, I want to encourage you, you cannot, let me just repeat for a third time, cannot turn your school building into a hotspot. I want that to just really ring across the internet for everyone, that you cannot turn your school building to a hotspot. As every student gets into, has their own mobile device for their learning on a day-to-day basis, The actual learning that takes place in your school building has to be something that was impossible, too difficult, ineffective, or impractical to do online. If all we're doing is providing devices for kids to come to school to get connected to the internet, then the new classroom is at Starbucks. The new classroom is at McDonald's. They can go to Chick-fil-A and get connected. They don't have to come to school to get onto the hotspot. That means the space and place of learning, as well as the people in learning, have to take on entirely new roles to make learning far more active, far more engaged, and most importantly, centered around the student. And as you see in these depictions, the desk, the tables that they have are really focused around collaboration for those students. They have the infrastructure there so that they can actually have power available all day. And then you also see in the second picture over on the right that there's not just one electronic whiteboard in the classroom, but there are actually multiple electronic whiteboards around the classroom that are there for the students to hijack that infrastructure and use it for their collaboration. They can connect to these electronic whiteboards just as easy as they wanted to connect to a printer in the classroom to bring up a document. It's changing this space. So while the devices themselves are getting very inexpensive to the point where they cost less than a pair of shoes, we need to think about how does the place and space of learning become far more engaged. And this is where we have an opportunity to really do something transformational. And so to show you a glimpse of what this looks like today, I have a school district in Tallahassee, Florida, Leon County Schools, that has done some really, really amazing things. And I want to give you just a short glimpse of how they're using technology in a meaningful way. They didn't choose one size to fit all. They chose their content, their context for learning, and they allowed the technology to follow the students' curiosity and creativity so that they can become more competitive in the competencies that they're developed. And after the video, we'll pick up and keep going. So I hope the video came through for you and connected the fact that our students today are learning at a different time. These kids are in middle school. They graduate in the year 2020 and the year 2021. Their experiences thus far from elementary, we hopefully have been preparing them for the competencies that they're going to need in the third decade when they're looking at career opportunities, when they're looking at college opportunities, when they're looking at entrepreneurship opportunities. All of those things are going to be significant and important as we move through this particular generation. So Microsoft, as we go back to this digital learning transition and how we're making our contribution against the Connect Ed initiative, is really super simple. We've got devices today that are going to be starting below $300 from all of the PC makers that you would traditionally buy devices from. But there is a asterisk there about the $300 because there is some fine print. And the fine print is simple, that the cost of devices are going to continue to plummet. Now, somebody is saying, oh, is this just a commercial for Microsoft devices? No, it's not. In fact, what I want you to get from this is that the economy has changed so dramatically that just this month in Taipei, there was a device, a Windows device, a tablet device being showcased that cost $100. That we'll see in the market in the year 2015. And also, we expect to see devices at $200 price points in this year of 2014 before we even reach the end of the calendar year. The reason that's important is because we are now at a place economically where we can actually get the tools of the creators in the hands of our children for less than what we would pay for a traditional textbook. Our textbooks today cost anywhere from $500 to $700 per student. Now we can actually get them in rich, engaging content that can be done on a canvas that allows them to be far more exploratory in their discovery of new information, insight, their analysis of it, as well as their ability to create things or have a hypothesis of learning that hasn't been tested before. This new economic scale and technology is so significant that we can now do some amazing things in the classroom and we have no excuse not to do them in a meaningful way. And Microsoft is trying to make sure that we enable that to take acquisition costs as a conversation that's off the table. It's really about execution excellence, not about how much the device costs, because, like I said earlier, it's going to be less than the price of a pair of shoes. Now, when we look at apps, which is always a funny conversation for people, apps continue to be one of the things that drive conversations. I'm more focused on what people actually want to do than I'm concerned about the number of apps, because from a Microsoft standpoint, there are far more apps available in the Windows ecosystem than there are any ecosystem on the planet. With the classic desktop apps that we continue to run the planet with, this is how business actually gets done. To that point, just a couple of weekends ago, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple Computers, tweeted a really funny picture. He tweeted he was in the factory in the U.S. trying to show people that Mac Pros are being made in the United States. Their PCs are finally being made here instead of abroad. It was a beautiful picture, except somebody spotted in the picture that the actual computers that were running the factory were Windows computers. So when you actually want to get something done, people tend to come back to Windows on a regular basis. Thank you, Tim, for pointing that out to all of us. Also, on the desktop front, we had Autodesk and Adobe participate in the Connect Ed initiative, and I highlight their applications here for you as well. Not just so that you can get focused to Autodesk and Adobe, but so that you can understand that Autodesk, Adobe, and Microsoft provide certifications that give students those post-secondary credentials that they need to be career ready. And that only in a Windows or a PC environment, whether it be Windows or Mac, but as long as it's a PC environment, students can actually get the credentials they need to prove that they have the competence to be able to be in the workplace and do the things that are expected of them. Beyond the classic desktop, there's a host of different applications that work entirely in the cloud that we'll talk about, new modern apps that work more for mobile devices and tablets, and as well as this range of the Internet of Things of all these devices that we connect to computers, whether it's 3D printing. We're going to be doing a demonstration at the ISTE conference in a couple of weeks where I'll be showcasing how you do collaboration to teach mathematics. And it's called the Great Pyramids of Math, Minecraft, and MakerBots, because the collaboration is not going to be done in a Word document. Collaboration is going to be facilitated through Minecraft and how we'll use MakerBots to actually build the Great Pyramids of Giza inside of the real world versus doing everything in the digital world, so that there's actually application of the things that we're trying to synthesize. And then you have this notion of all of the devices that you currently own, as well as things that haven't been invented yet. But the reason why devices apps stand out for me is because of assistive technologies that so many students with special needs depend on as their ability to be curious, as their ability to express. They need to have confidence that the devices they use will actually work with the things they already have. And so these things make it super important that as we consider what ecosystem we want to play in, that we have an ecosystem that's broad enough to provide the greatest amount of opportunity for our students to be competitive. Now, ultimately, I said this was about college and career readiness. And when we think about career readiness and college readiness, ACT has some insight for us to think about, as well as the industry itself has some insight to think about. And so on the first side, I want to highlight for you these 4 skills for the future that we found across all of the industries we work with and all of the research we do, that these skill sets are going to continue to permeate throughout society as the 4 most sought after skills that people need to have in order to get into high-wage, high-growth careers, things that are not going to be automated, things that are not going to be outsourced to another country for low-wage labor, and things that are not going to be retired because we simply don't need that skill set anymore. Now, creativity and intuitive design, when people see creativity and design, oftentimes people are thinking about graduate profiles for their students, and that we need to have students that do problem solving. And I will really push back on any of your schools that have a graduate profile that says your graduates need to be great at problem solving. That is really problematic, pun intended. Because when we think about this, just 2 weekends ago, there was a computer test, the Turing test of artificial intelligence, where we have a computer now was able to prove to humans that it was actually human. I would encourage you to look back 2 weekends for the Turing test and the AI that proved to humans that it was humans. We have computers that can solve problems. That's not where we need to have students spend their time. So what we don't have computers that can do is be creative. They can't innovate. They can't produce something that the world actually needs. And so when we think about creativity, this is one of those things that actually goes further than just merely problem solving. It's about having kids remix ideas and bring different disciplines to bear in order to approach a problem in a new and novel way. When I think about design, too often people are thinking about, should we add arts or music or theater and other forms of artistic expression back to our STEM disciplines? And is that what he means by design? And I want to make this caveat, no, that's not what I mean by design. It's simply that we live in a world of abundance, and we have too much of everything. There are too many choices when you go to any store. Go to your grocery store. Is there just one jar of ketchup? Is there one place for you to get a steak? We have a variety of things that we have to choose from. Daniel Pink writes in his book about the fact that today we have designer toilet bowl brushes because people just don't want to clean their toilets with just a regular old brush. Design matters. And it matters because when we have so much abundance, you have to find new ways to get things to stand out, because just simply being functionally capable is not going to be enough to be differentiated and create value. Those things become commoditized. And design is more than just making things. Design is in how you think about business. Design is in how you think about growing something or having a conversation. If you see the movie Jobs that chronicles the life of Steve Jobs and the growth of Apple, one of the things that Steve highlights throughout the movie is not only is he great in thinking about design and building technology, but he was also intuitive in how he thought about the design of the business model that Apple would play in its financing. And so design matters across a wide variety of disciplines, not just simply how do we implement it in a technical way. Narrative building and storytelling become crucial to our students. And you'll see later as we talk about our IDC data that our ability to tell stories is as old as humanity itself. And as we move forward, whether it's telling stories with data, whether it's telling stories with numbers, financial stories, or whether it's getting people to understand a position, that narrative building context is growing much more than just simply PowerPoint presentations to being able to have a position, defend a position, or persuade someone to take the same position you have. This is the skill set that all companies have to take, whether they're trying to pitch an idea, market an idea, or whether it's an organization trying to get help so that they can feed people in Haiti. Storytelling, narrative building is a constant skill set across the board. This notion of a cultural context and empathy to be more globally aware is also around the fact that in the 21st century, our kids are going to be competing with students around the world, but also understanding that supply chains, we're all interconnected across all of the different things that we do in every society. Or take, for example, that in the early 90s or in the 90s, there was this rise movement around conflict diamonds because there are lots of diamond manufacturers and jewelry manufacturers buying diamonds from areas in Africa that were constantly creating genocide or constantly abusing its citizens, and they were just crimes against humanity. But in those same areas today, as we think about this cultural savviness and cultural context, there are conflicts for minerals that go into the electronics that we have, whether they be mining for quartz for screens, whether it be mining for copper, for technology, or even sand. We have to be far more mindful of where things come from and how we appreciate them. And then lastly, I really encourage you to go check out Kirby Ferguson's at goodiebag.tv, Everything is a Remix, because he really speaks to the whole nature of creativity and how we copy, how we transform, and how we combine different things to produce something new. And when we look at teams today, being able to mash up ideas that other people have built before and be able to build on top of that knowledge becomes super important in the skill sets. And companies are no longer just hiring individuals. They're buying entire teams from companies in order to get the magic that the team creates together. And so when we think about collaboration, whether your kids can author a document at the same time online is really a moot point. Whether they can actually produce something that the world needs that is truly novel and necessary is where innovation is produced. And these are the skill sets that we're going to see continue to be amplified. From the ACT standpoint, we know that only 1 out of 4 students in the United States actually pass all parts of the ACT. This results in the fact that we spend $9 billion a year in remedial education for students in their freshman year of college. Only 1 out of 3 students pass the science portion. This readiness that we've had as we look at the transition that we're on, we've got to improve our capacity in order for our students to be successful for the opportunities in college. While we have more accessibility to higher education than we have ever had before, we don't have a lot of completion. While there are so many different statistics of whether we have a 75% graduation rate or a 95% high school graduation rate, we know our 4-year and 6-year graduation rates from our colleges are completely terrible. On average, for a public institution, it's about 55% graduation rate in 4 years, and for a private institution, it's over 60% graduation rate. When you're spending a little bit more money to go to school, your parents tend to make sure you actually graduate from our private institutions. But even if they graduate, are they career ready? Because we've got 19 million people in the United States that have a college degree that are either unemployed or underemployed, and there are 38 million people that have gone by college and never graduated. Those people, if they actually had their degrees, we would have a nation that had 60% of its adult population with a college degree. And the reason those statistics are important is because it speaks to that ranking that we have in terms of national competitiveness. The more college-educated people we have, the more our wages grow up, the more capacity we have to innovate, and the more capacity we have to use innovation to actually continue the leadership that the United States has had around the world. Finally, when we look at how do we take this discipline around high-wage, high-growth jobs, IDC did a study that Microsoft commissioned, and they found that for high-wage, high-growth careers for this decade, the jobs that are available right now, oral and written communications are the #1 skills that you need to have, which for me was just kind of a shocking kind of finding, because when we look at our K-12 schools, oral and written communications are actually what we assess the least at a state level. We may assess writing twice in an academic year, maybe 3 times on the outset in an academic year, and we never assess speech as a component of proficiency or a competence you need to move to the next level. And these are super important skill sets, because it goes back to being the storytelling and building the narrative. It goes back to our ability to collaborate and do mashups. It goes back to our ability to have empathy, that if you don't have these oral and written communication skills, you're going to be at a disadvantage. And when they looked at technology and software, Microsoft Word and PowerPoint were the 2 products that they said, these products, they need to have a proficient skill set in order to do that. Now, I thought that was pretty self-serving, because I work at Microsoft, that they would say Word and PowerPoint. But when you look at around the world and how people tell their story, how they build their narratives, they write in Word, they collaborate in Word, they write and present and tell in PowerPoint. Even though we're using WebEx today, we're using PowerPoint to share this narrative. And so these technologies, these capabilities begin to facilitate a skill set of oral and written communication. But I would submit to you, our kids need to go beyond just writing in Word and PowerPoint to having all types of ways of telling a story. And this is the great opportunity we have today. As we look at the marketplace of what jobs exist, and I encourage you, if you're online, go to Indeed.com and you can do this search yourself so that you can validate and tweet back to me at EduCTO if Cameron is smoking it or if he's really bringing it. Because there are more jobs in the state of Texas, that require Microsoft skills, Microsoft certifications, Microsoft competencies than there are entire jobs for Google skills and competencies in the entire U.S. Same for Apple, the same for Cisco. When you look at, and these are not jobs that will be available in the year 2020 and 2021 when those Leon County schools students graduate. These are not jobs that will be available in the year 2025 when those second graders graduate. These are vacancies that are here tonight when your high school students that just graduated and your college students that just graduated this past May and this early part of June. Those are the vacancies in the United States tonight. 319,000 versus about 20,000 for Google, 18,000 for Apple, and 22,000. And so it speaks to, are the ecosystems that we choose for this digital learning transition really helping our students get access to the opportunities? And oftentimes people look at this and goes, well, these Microsoft skills, these must be high technical jobs. No, these are for people selling paint that need to know how to make a presentation in PowerPoint to their customers so that they can get sales. These are people working in clinical care that need to be able to use Microsoft Access to access all of their clinical records so they can serve their patients that come in. So we need to really broaden our thinking that when corporations come in and talk about education, it's not so that everybody can get focused on STEM. It's so that we can all make sure that the opportunity gaps gets closed. To do that from a Microsoft standpoint, we have IT Academy that we announced in our Connect Ed initiative that allows students to get actual certifications. So just like Adobe has certifications for Photoshop and Premiere, Autodesk has certifications for their 3D Studio Max for those type of creative, Rivet, and all the things that you would have from an architectural engineering standpoint. Across all of those applications that Microsoft has, whether it be Office or developer tools or server tools, we provide certifications through schools. And there are a few states already that have licensed IT academies for all of their middle school students and all of their high school students so that they can get this preparation now so that those students that are graduating within the next couple of years can seize these opportunities today. And I encourage you to check out more about IT Academy. But now we need to have a flip and talk about some of the most important people to make all of this transition happen. We can buy all the technology in the world. We can buy all of the devices in the world. We can actually change the way our classrooms look and get some really rich content. But if our educators are not ready, if they're content knowledge, if their pedagogical knowledge, if their technological literacy is not up to par with the demands that we have available to them, it creates a strong challenge for us. And so we're going to open up a poll so that you have an opportunity to give us some feedback on how do you see the educator challenge, because this is the last piece that we need to think through. We've got better instructional materials and curriculum resources. Is that where we need to focus? More money for classroom supplies and technology, simply more time, or better teacher-student ratios, smaller class sizes is where we need to spend our energies. So if you would just quickly answer the poll, we'll look at the data and see where you all think that we need to give our energies in terms of how do we expand the practice and capacity of our educators. So I'm showing that the poll has ended, and we'll look at what the results were. And so the results of the poll is that we need better instructional time or instructional materials, and number 2 was more money for the class, and number 3 is more time. The vast majority of the folks are either drinking Starbucks or multitasking on their devices. It's interesting how these results come out on the poll on a regular basis. We get some different interpretations. When we go out to schools, what teachers ask for the most from when we talk to teachers on a regular basis, not people who pretend to be teachers on the weekend, ask for more time. They never ask for better instructional materials and curriculum resources, because many of our teachers are actually curating and creating their own so that they have better instructional materials and curriculum resources. They're not waiting for Superman, they're saving themselves. When it comes to money and classroom supplies and technology, it's a reality that they've lived with for quite some time. And student ratios is just a matter of funding. They're decided at the state level. It's a policy issue, and oftentimes not a factor that a classroom teacher can have really a significant amount of impact. And as we get more technology, this becomes a challenge. But time is a constraint that no one can get around, because we have so many new content standards, so many new assessment instruments, so much new technology, so much is changing, as well as how we think about the challenges in the classroom for our students. These are the gaps that we need to really cross the border and see what we can do differently to help our students with. And so Microsoft is really focusing on educator development, and I encourage you to go to www.pil-network.com to see all of the free tools and resources that we have. There are tutorials to help you with your pedagogical practice, as well as how to use the technology in these new pedagogical practices, as well as content. This is not content that is created by Microsoft. It's content that is created by educators, by master practitioners in the classroom from around the world. So you would join a large community of experts that are looking at what are the hot topics, what are the issues that they're facing in schools. Once we solve the time conundrum, once we solve the finance conundrum, once we solve the supply, curriculum, technology conundrum, what other issues exist beyond those that we need to focus on in our schools? And pil-network.com has all of those resources, and they're absolutely free for our teachers to have so that they can get access to it late at night, earlier in the day. Now, as we move forward, you see a whole lot of things that we've done from Office 365, and those technologies also allow teachers to have this notion that they don't need to search for content anymore. As an educator, one of the things that always boggled me is the fact that we have teachers spend so much time looking for content to present to their kids, whether it's to take an intervention, whether it's to do an enrichment, whether it is to change the context of learning. Why do teachers have to spend so much time looking for it when we as an institution know who they are, what they teach, what their needs are, even know the kids in their classroom and what their needs are? And so you'll see in Office 365 over the year, and if you come to our exhibit at ISTE, you'll also see some examples of how we're taking search and flipping it on its head and allow social, the nature of social media, the nature of search and the nature of content development to actually find teachers so that when they actually want to do professional development or expand their own personal learning networks for their professional growth, they'll see this content really find them at 10 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock in the morning, or any time in between without them ever having to look at it. Now, we're at a place where we can actually take some questions. I've seen some tweets come through. I know we've got some things happening in the chat. I want to open it up to all of our guests, and I really appreciate you all listening, but this is an opportunity for us to hear back from you, answer some very specific questions, and I'll turn it back over to Sean so that we can do that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Cameron, for that excellent presentation. We received several questions from the audience, and in case we don't get to those questions, I'd like to remind the audience to please send their questions and comments your way on Twitter, which is at EDUCTO, using the hashtag EDUEmpowered. Now, as the moderator, I would like to take the privilege to ask the first question. So, in the context of the 4 skills for the future that you mentioned, Cameron, you mentioned creativity and intuitive design as a skill for the future. Is that just another way for including arts and humanities into STEM education with technology?
Not at all. One of the things that as we start building this out, this is going to be much harder for us to think about how do you build that into teaching and learning? How do you build that practice? There's been recent studies, and Sir Ken Robinson has talked about this quite a bit as well, that when you talk to kindergartners and talk to first graders and ask them how many of them are artists, they all raise their hands and let you know that they can draw. But as you go across their entire academic career until you get to high school students, you find that by the time kids get to high school, none of them are artists anymore. None of them are creative. They have lost that ability. And so one of the things we have to think about is how do we keep that first and foremost in the minds of our students and actually appreciate these different perspectives? How do we appreciate and showcase that if we have multiple discoveries where we have 2 people come up with the same idea seemingly at the same time, that we can appreciate that this line of thinking, this thought process is actually good, and it's actually something that these 2 students independently of each other were able to produce. There are scenarios that we can do that go beyond just simply how do we consume content, how do we read, to really pushing students to produce content. Last year at ISTE in San Antonio, one of the ways that we showcased that was that my colleague Scott Thompson is here with me now, and he had written a paper document to be shared with all of our ISTE participants. That document is actually online now in Barnes & Noble. And one of the things we wanted to do is collaborate, remix, mash up the document that he had originally produced for print consumption and say, what would this be like if we actually used it for electronic consumption? And so we demonstrated at ISTE how we could take the same tools that we use for authoring for print and re-author that for accessibility, so that students that had special needs would also be able to consume that, re-author it for electronic consumption, and then we published that using a variety of text complexity measures like Flesch-Kincaid. Some people use Lexile scoring. There are other scores that people can use to determine text complexity, and publish that online. The notion here is if a student can write at grade level, then they ought to be able to read at grade level. We're pretty confident of that. And there are technologies that allow us to do that in Microsoft Word to show this creative expression in a new and meaningful way, but to synthesize it in such a way where we didn't just have an electronic document, we actually published it as an electronic book that can be consumed and downloaded from barnesandnoble.com. It changes the scope of where we think kids can go, and also introduces an entirely new skill of entrepreneurship that they can now participate in this digital economy versus just simply thinking that innovation in the classroom is me emailing a document to my teacher or uploading it to a file share in the cloud. That's really not innovation. That's just the next evolution of an analog process. If we're actually preparing our students to be creative and understand design, we need to help them understand how the entire supply chain of creativity works in a meaningful way.
Thank you very much, Cameron. Our first question from the audience is, how do you get tablets for students who can't afford them?
That's the good news. The question of affordance is really becoming a issue that is going away. And so when we look at students that may have low financial needs or a low socioeconomic status, when we have devices that cost less than $300, I do respect the fact that for some families, some households, that's still a lot of money. Even if it was $50, that could still be a lot of money. And so you have to look at, if we're doing this from an equity standpoint, should the school district offset that cost? And also you have to make a decision about what time do I want to enter the market? Because as I said, the cost of these devices will continue to decline, where they're below $300 today. Very shortly, they'll be around $200, and shortly after that, we'll see them around $100. So where you enter the market is going to have an opportunity to determine whether you can get tablets to students that can't afford them or whether they can themselves. And it's just getting cheaper and cheaper by the year. But even with one computer, if you go to our pillnetwork.com site, you'll find teachers that are teaching with one computer and still building capacity and literacy for kids, to having classrooms full of computers for all of those kids. So don't let price and cost be a constraint. That is a constraint that is falling away.
Okay, thank you very much. We have another question which is somewhat similar, and that is, how can we keep up with new devices and avoid the outdated PDAs of the past?
to prevent getting another Palm Pilot or a Pocket PC, my suggestion is give it up. Don't try to keep up with it, and don't even attempt it. I work with this stuff, and it's challenging to keep up with not only the pace of innovation, but the breadth of innovation. And what I look for is how, as we move into this more mobile, cloud-first connected era, is where is my data actually stored? And when I can store things in the cloud, ultimately I want to have my content, my creative works, my things that I'm investigating available on all these devices. And so I need to choose services that allow me to have mobility and portability across a wide range of devices versus do I need to just find one fixed device that I'm going to keep for 3 years or keep for 5 years. I think we're past that point from a society standpoint and from a technological standpoint that we need to really be thinking, how do we make learning far more transitory, so that anywhere, anytime, any device, any skill learning can actually happen far more fluidly for all of our teachers and for our students.
Okay, Cameron, and I think we have time for just one more question. What about other technologies we may be using? How can we integrate those technologies?
That's the good news. There are over 3 million devices that connect to Windows devices right out of the box. And those devices, I spend a lot of time looking at, and that's one of the things we want to highlight when we think about apps, whether it's buying a drone kind of remote control copter that we want to use to teach geography, or to do science, to teach geospatial learning and have kids actually get outside and see what the landscape looks like, take readings and measurements from the air, not just things on the ground. You need devices that have a lot of fluidity to do that, but not just one where all I can do is control the device at one time, but something where I can actually get data being fed to me so I can read that data and then use that data to do analysis and interpretation to understand the difference between correlation and causation, so that I can tell a story. Because just because two things happen at the same time don't mean that one caused the other to happen. And this is where those critical thinking skills across devices really come into play. I think as teachers start looking at the context that they want learning to take place in, the engagement is going to skyrocket and go out the roof, and they'll have the technology to connect up to a whole new world of devices that just a few short years ago were impossible to consider, impossible to afford, and impossible to use.
Well, and on that note, I think we will conclude our webinar presentation. Thank you again so very much, Cameron, for sharing your expertise with us. And as a reminder to those who may have joined in a little bit late, please be on the lookout for a follow-up email with a copy of the slides and a link to the archive to review and share this presentation with colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.